9 years ago, I buried my husband. I stood over an empty casket in the rain, held my son's hand, and told myself that grief, however heavy, was at least honest. It doesn't lie to you. It just sits there and lets you carry it at your own pace. And then, on a Tuesday morning somewhere over the Midwest, my 12-year-old son turned to me with a face gone the color of skim milk and whispered 4 words that split my whole world back open. "Mom, that's Dad." I laughed it off. The trip had been Elijah's idea, or maybe it had been mine and I'd let him think it was his. Either way, it had taken me 9 years to agree to a plane ticket that wasn't for a funeral. Just the 2 of us, Delta out of O'Hare, Virginia Beach for his cousin's graduation. Seats 17A and 17B, chosen off the seat map 2 weeks earlier, Elijah tracing his finger along the aisle the way he'd done since he was small enough to need my hand to do it. My name is Imani Freeman. I'm 43 years old. For 9 years, one belief kept me standing upright every morning, that the man I loved most in this world drowned on Lake Michigan on a gray October night, and that the smaller, quieter life I'd built since then was at least mine. A week before, my brother-in-law Darius had called twice, just to check the flight number and what time we'd land. Sweet of him, I thought at the time, always looking out for us since Malik passed. I didn't think anything of it then. I'd think about it a lot later. We were at the gate when Elijah first went quiet. I noticed it the way I noticed everything about him now. Carefully, like checking a wound to see if it had reopened. He was staring past my shoulder into the boarding line behind us. "Baby, what is it?" He didn't answer. I followed his eyes and saw nothing but ordinary people dragging ordinary suitcases. I told myself it was nerves. Airports do that to kids. Too much waiting, too many strangers. I'd raised him alone long enough to know when to push and when to let a thing go. I let it go. By the time we found our row, I'd almost forgotten it. Rain streaked sideways across the little oval window. The plane taxied. Ordinary. Boring, even. The kind of morning you forget by lunchtime. It's easy to forget sometimes that I hadn't always been the woman folding herself into a window seat with a nurse's exhaustion in her shoulders. There had been a version of me, once, who dreamed of the trauma bay at Northwestern Memorial instead of double shifts just to keep the lights on. I didn't have time to think about her much anymore. I had a son who needed both parents' worth of steady. Then that son went rigid beside me. I felt it before I understood it. His hand tightening on mine, his whole body going still in a way that had nothing to do with turbulence. I turned to look at him first, and something about the stillness in his face made the hair rise on the back of my neck before my mind caught up. "Baby, what's wrong?" "Mom, that's Dad." I laughed, the way you laugh when your child says something so impossible it has to be a joke. But he wasn't laughing. I told myself I was turning around to prove him wrong, to show him there was nothing back there but strangers, so he could relax and enjoy the flight like an ordinary boy on an ordinary trip. I turned around. 2 rows back, a man was settling into his seat, hair cropped close, black going gray at the temples, in the exact pattern I used to trace with my finger on quiet Sunday mornings a lifetime ago. I told myself it was nothing. Men go gray like that all the time. Then I saw his hand on the armrest, right hand, thumb turning his wedding ring in a slow, unconscious circle. The same nervous habit Malik Washington had carried for 15 years of marriage, every time something was eating at him and he didn't want to say what. My heart stopped. 2 full seconds where the cabin noise simply disappeared. I told myself it still wasn't him. Men have habits. Rings get turned, hair goes gray. Then I saw the scar, small, pale, cutting through the outer edge of his left eyebrow. The exact scar Malik got in 2014, falling off a ladder fixing our roof in Englewood. I had cleaned that cut myself at our kitchen sink before he'd even agreed to go to urgent care. There was nothing left to tell myself. I want you to notice something about me in this moment. I didn't scream. I didn't stand up in that aisle and demand answers. Some part of me, the nurse part, the mother part, understood instantly that the second I made noise, I'd lose control of everything that came next. My fear wasn't of him. It was of falling apart before I understood what I was even falling apart over. So I did what I've always done. I went quiet and I went calculating. Because a woman who's had to be the strong one for 9 years doesn't know how to be anything else, even in shock. I turned back around slow, like moving too fast might shatter something. Elijah leaned in close, his voice barely a breath. When we were waiting to board, Mom, he was right behind us in line. He looked down at my boarding pass, then he turned away fast, like he already knew I'd be sitting here. That sentence hit me harder than his face had. My mind, without my permission, dragged me back 9 years, to Malik crying at our kitchen table, gripping my hand as he signed loan papers I'd co-signed after selling my car and draining $18,000 of savings. "You're the only one who ever believed in me," he'd said. "I gave that man everything I had." Now here he was, 2 rows back, breathing, watching us. My hand found Elijah's and squeezed until my knuckles ached. The wheels touched down with a hard, screeching thump. "Baby," I whispered, flatter and colder than I think I've ever heard myself sound. "Don't say another word. Don't look at him again. Mama's going to find out everything." If a man can come back from the dead once, what else has he been hiding? Stay with me for what happens at baggage claim. We were the last 2 people off that plane. I made sure of it, needing to see where he went without him seeing me watch. The jet bridge smelled like recycled air and rain-damp carpet, and somewhere behind us a flight attendant was saying, "Thank you for flying with us today," in the flat, practiced cheer of someone who says it 40 times a shift. I kept Elijah's hand in mine and my eyes fixed on the black duffel bag 2 rows ahead, my whole body tuned to one man's shoulders the way I used to tune myself to a monitor alarm at the nurse's station. That particular alertness where your pulse doesn't spike, it just goes very, very still. Through the gap in the seats, I caught it, him slinging a black duffel bag over one shoulder, saying something low to a young woman beside him. Long box braids, an easy laugh, her arm sliding through his like it belonged there. She looked happy. She looked like a woman with no idea her whole life was standing on somebody else's grave. At baggage claim, the carousel groaned and clicked, spitting out suitcases in no order I could follow, and I stood there, gripping the handle of ours so hard my palm ached, watching them over Elijah's head. They boarded a shuttle. I read the side of the van as it pulled away. Hilton, Virginia Beach, oceanfront. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Same resort I'd booked 3 months ago. Same week. I remembered booking it. Elijah at the kitchen table, scrolling resort photos on my phone, stopping on one with a lazy river and saying, "That one, Mom, please." And me thinking, watching him light up over something as small as a pool, that maybe we'd finally earned an ordinary vacation. 9 years of grief doesn't leave much room for ordinary. I'd wanted to give him that. I hadn't known I was booking us into the same week as the man I'd buried. In the taxi, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone calling Terrence Marshall, the attorney who'd handled Malik's estate and who I still trusted completely, one of the only people who'd never once made me feel foolish for how long it took me to stop wearing black, who'd sat across from me at the kitchen table 9 years ago and walked me through insurance forms in a voice so patient I'd cried twice just from the kindness of it. "Terrence, I just saw him." 4 seconds of silence stretched out so long I thought the call had dropped. "If that's true," he said finally, "then Elijah's $350,000 life insurance payout was collected on a lie. Don't approach anyone. We need real proof before we go to a soul about this. Call me every hour." I hung up and sat very still on the back seat, the Virginia Beach skyline sliding by outside the window, and I realized my son hadn't said a single word since the plane. I reached over and pulled him against me, and he let me, which told me more than anything he could have said. That night in our hotel room, I sat on the edge of his bed while he lay curled on his side, still in his travel clothes because neither of us had had the heart to unpack. "Mom," he said into the pillow, so quiet I almost missed it. "Did I do something wrong? Telling you on the plane?" "No, baby, never. I smoothed his hair back the way I had when he was small enough to rock to sleep. You saw something true, and you told me. That's the bravest thing you could have done. Is Dad going to go to jail? I didn't have an answer for that one yet, and I've never been able to lie to him well, so I just said, I don't know. But whatever happens, you and me, that part doesn't change. He didn't ask anything else after that. He just cried, quietly. The kind of crying kids do when they're trying not to be a burden about it. And I stayed until his breathing evened out, until his hand went slack in mine. I sat out on the balcony long after, the ocean a dark, restless sound below. And that's when I heard it. A voice floating up from 2 floors below, low, unhurried. I would know that voice underwater. Around midnight, he walked out alone to the edge of the pool and looked straight up at my balcony. 3 long seconds. He didn't flinch. He didn't run. Then he turned and went back inside. I didn't sleep. I lay there running through every phone call Darius had made in the last year. Every one that had seemed, at the time, like nothing at all. A birthday text for Elijah 2 days early once. A comment about how good the boy was getting at basketball, when Darius had supposedly only seen him play twice. Small things. The kind of small things you don't examine until you have a reason to. The next morning, I played dumb at the front desk about a billing mix-up, my coffee going cold in my hand while the young clerk typed with the unhurried patience of someone whose biggest problem that day was a mislabeled folio. The clerk turned her monitor toward me by accident, and there it was, Mr. Jamal Coleman, reservation made 62 days in advance. Specific request for pool view room, same floor as reservation under the name Freeman. I stared at that screen until the clerk asked if everything was all right, and I said, yes, fine, thank you, in a voice that came out steadier than I had any right to expect. Jamal Coleman, not Malik Washington. And he hadn't stumbled onto us by accident. 62 days. He'd known where we'd be almost as long as I had. My hands went cold. I rented a car and followed them to a diner off Virginia Beach Boulevard, a low, sun-bleached building with a bell over the door and the smell of bacon grease thick enough to taste. The young woman waited outside on a bench, scrolling her phone in the shade of the awning. He went in alone. I slipped into a booth 2 behind him, my back to him. Phone recording low against my thigh. My heart going so hard I was sure the whole diner could hear it over the clatter of plates. He was on a call. I caught pieces, his voice pitched low over the sound of a waitress refilling coffee somewhere behind me. Insurance won't reopen if the documents stay clean. I made sure she can never know the account exists. A heavy-set older man rose from a booth across from him. Gray at the temples, a gold ring worn thin with age. The kind of unhurried, unbothered walk of a man who has never once had to explain himself to anyone in a room, and left without a word to anyone. On the floor by his chair was a folded scrap of paper. I picked it up on my way out, my fingers not quite steady. 6 words in a hurried hand. The boys' school photo, still on your desk. Careful. Somebody else knew Malik kept a photograph of our son. Somebody else was watching both of us. This is the part of the story where a quiet drama family secret stops being quiet and starts becoming dangerous. I sat in the rental car in the diner parking lot for a long moment before I could make my hands work the phone. I sent the recording and the note straight to Terrence. His reply came back inside a minute. That's a start, but it's not enough yet to take anywhere official. And someone besides us is watching him too. Don't move again until I call you. I sat there staring at that message, engine still off, sun coming hard through the windshield. And here's the honest truth. A part of me wanted to march up to that room right then and knock the door down myself. I thought about Elijah back at the hotel, with the pool sitter I'd arranged through the front desk, probably floating on his back the way he loved to, trusting that whatever his mother was doing, it was going to fix this. That thought was the only thing that kept my hand off the door handle. So tell me straight, if you were sitting in that car with proof of fraud in your hand and a scared 12-year-old in the next room, do you confront him that same night, or do you wait and build the case first? Team confront or team wait? Drop a 1 or a 2 in the comments right now, because next part is where one of you is going to be proven right. I decided the only way through this was to get close to the woman who had no idea what she was standing inside of. The pool deck smelled like chlorine and coconut sunscreen, and somewhere a resort speaker was playing something soft and steel-drummed, the kind of music meant to make you forget you had a life waiting for you back home. I found Keisha stretched out under a striped umbrella, sunglasses pushed up into her braids, scrolling her phone with the particular ease of a woman who has never once had to wonder if the ground under her was solid. I made it look like an accident when I settled into the chair 2 down from hers, bag accidentally nudging her cooler, an apology, a laugh. She waved it off before I'd even finished the sentence. She was easy to talk to, that was the worst part. Quick to laugh, generous with her attention, the kind of warmth that made you forget to be careful. She asked where I was from, and I said Chicago, and something behind her eyes flickered, there and gone, before she said, "Small world," in a voice just a half step too light. I filed that away. I was learning to file everything away now. She pulled out her phone to show me pictures the way strangers do at pools everywhere, thumbs swiping fast past vacations and dinners and a dog I didn't ask about, and I sat there with my hands folded in my lap so they wouldn't shake. Watching her scroll, my mind slipped sideways the way it had started doing more and more since the plane, to a cream-colored envelope that came in the mail 8 years ago, an offer for a full-time position in the emergency department at Northwestern Memorial. I remember standing in our kitchen in Inglewood with that letter in my hand, the paper still warm from the mailbox, feeling something in my chest lift for the first time in months. "You'd be gone 12-hour shifts, 3-4 days a week," Malik had said, not looking up from the bills spread across the table. Who's here for Elijah then? I tore the letter in half that night over the kitchen sink and never told anyone I'd cried doing it. I was 43 years old now, and to most people in my life, I was still only ever Elijah's mother. I used to think that was enough. Sitting by that pool, I wasn't so sure anymore whose choice that had actually been. Keisha stopped on a photo, a little boy, maybe 4, hazel eyes, a crown of dark curls, achingly familiar in a way that made my stomach drop before my brain caught up to why. "That's Theo," she said, smiling the soft, unguarded smile of a woman talking about the best thing in her life. "Jamal's son. He's obsessed with dinosaurs right now. Won't eat dinner unless it's on the plate shaped like a T-Rex." The floor tilted under me. I kept my face still. 9 years of night shifts in an ER waiting room teaches you that. How to keep your face arranged around whatever is breaking inside it. She scrolled again, slower now, the way people do when they're about to show you something that matters to them. A small house out west, sun-bleached and modest. "Our first place, out in Nevada. You always wanted a corner just for hanging up Theo's drawings, and, well," she hesitated, and something crossed her face I couldn't name yet. "He kept one from before, from his son who passed. Never takes it down." She turned the phone so I could see the wall behind her in the photo. A small house out west, and there, framed in dollar store plastic and hung with more care than anything else on that wall, a crayon drawing. A child's crooked backward letters at the bottom, the E drawn the wrong way, the way 5-year-olds always draw it. "To Daddy, love, Elijah." I knew that drawing. I had watched my living, breathing son make it at our kitchen table with a box of 8 crayons, his tongue between his teeth in concentration. So proud he'd carried it around the house for 2 days before Malik finally took it to work with him. Malik had taken our boy's love and hung it on a stranger's wall like a memorial to a child he'd told this woman was dead. Not misplaced, not lost in a move, displayed, curated. A dead son as a prop in a life he'd built on the bones of the one he'd walked out of. No drama family script I could have imagined would have prepared me for that particular cruelty. Something in my chest cracked open right there in the sunlight, quiet and total, like ice giving way under weight you didn't know was too much. "It was lovely meeting you," I managed, my voice coming out steadier than I had any right to expect, and I got up before I came apart in front of a woman who'd done nothing but be lied to as thoroughly as I had. I didn't go back to my room. I walked the beach instead, shoes in my hand, the tide cold enough to sting, and I let myself have exactly 4 minutes of falling apart, counted them on my phone the way I'd once timed contractions, before I wiped my face, breathed out slow through my mouth the way I taught scared families to do in the ER doorway 100 times, and put myself back together enough to be a mother again by the time I reached the hotel elevator. That evening, walking back along a palm-lined path with Elijah's hand in mine, the string lights overhead humming faintly with insects, Malik stepped out of the shadows between 2 hedges. Close enough that I smelled him before I fully saw him. The same cedar soap he'd used for 15 years, absurdly, cruelly unchanged. Elijah froze mid-stride, his fingers going tight and cold in mine. Malik looked at me first. 4 years. 5, 9. I couldn't tell anymore how much time was compressed into the one look he gave me. "Please," he said, low, almost pleading. "Not here." Elijah's voice came out smaller than I'd heard it since he was 6 years old. "Why won't you hug me?" The question hit the space between us like a stone dropped into still water. Malik's jaw worked. He took 1 step forward and stopped himself, like there was a line drawn in the pavement he didn't trust himself not to cross wrong. I pulled my son against my side and looked at the stranger, wearing my husband's face under the string lights. "I don't know everything yet," I said. And my voice didn't shake, which surprised me more than it should have. "But I will." Walking away, my arm around Elijah's shoulders, I noticed a man in a dark jacket standing perfectly still at the far end of the hallway near the elevator bank. No phone in his hand, no drink, nothing to explain why a grown man would simply stand there in a hotel corridor at 9 at night. He wasn't looking at me. He was watching Malik's door, the way you watch something you've been told to watch, not something you're curious about. I didn't say anything to Elijah. I just walked a little faster. Midnight came with a soft knock, 3 taps, the kind a man makes when he's already decided he'll leave if you don't answer fast enough. I opened the door on the chain first, old ER habit, never fully trust a hallway, before I saw it really was him and let it fall away. Malik stood there in the weak yellow light of the hall sconce, older than the man on the plane had looked from 2 rows back, thinner through the face, eyes rimmed red like he hadn't slept the night before either. His hands were empty except for a black canvas bag hanging off one shoulder, and he held it the way you hold something you've rehearsed handing over and still aren't ready to. "Everything you believe about what happened to me," he said, "is only half true." I let him in. The door shut behind him like a period at the end of a sentence I'd been writing for 9 years. "Start talking," I said, arms crossed, standing between him and the bedroom where my son was finally, mercifully, asleep. "And don't stop until I understand all of it." What could possibly be the other half of a lie this big? "You're not ready for what's in the box he brought with him?" The door clicked shut. I crossed my arms and repeated myself, colder. "Start talking, and don't stop." His hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to work the zipper on the bag, the metal teeth catching each time, and the small sound of it in that quiet room was somehow worse than anything he could have said. He pulled out a flash drive first, setting it on the desk between us like it might go off, and then, my breath caught somewhere behind my ribs, a small, battered steel box I hadn't seen since 2017, the same dent in the corner. The same scratch across the lid from the time it fell off a closet shelf. "You asked me about this once," he said, not looking at me. "Right after Elijah was born. I told you I'd lost it in the move. I hadn't. I hid it before I ever died." I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed because my legs didn't feel entirely reliable anymore. Inside the box, a safe deposit key on a thin brass ring, a yellowed envelope, edges soft with handling. A Nevada identity document under the name Jamal Coleman, the photo unmistakably him, but with a haircut I'd never seen. And beneath that, a photo ID with him smiling beside a visibly pregnant Keisha, both of them squinting into some western sun, looking like people who had never once had to explain themselves to anyone. It came out in pieces, the way confessions do when a man has been holding them so long he's forgotten how to say them in order. The logistics company he'd built with a man named Andre Jefferson, the one I remembered him being so proud of, the one he used to talk about over dinner with his sleeves rolled up and real light in his eyes, had been a front for laundering money almost from the start. He hadn't known, not at first. He found out slowly, the way you find out a floor is rotten, one soft board at a time, until the day he stepped down too hard and the whole thing gave way beneath him. By the time he understood what he was standing inside, he says he was already too deep to simply walk away clean. I tried to pull out, he said, and for the first time his voice cracked in a way that sounded less rehearsed. Andre made it clear what that would cost. He knew Elijah's school. He knew your shift schedule at the hospital before you even switched to nights. He described your drive home to me, Amani, turn by turn. I thought of every ordinary evening I'd driven that route feeling perfectly safe, and something cold moved through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He staged the accident on Lake Michigan, alone, on a night he knew the Coast Guard would be stretched thin with storm warnings elsewhere. A life jacket left floating where it would be found. A body that would never be recovered, because there had never been a body to recover. He said it plainly, without flinching, like a man who had told himself this story so many times in his own head that saying it out loud had lost some of its weight for him, even as it took every bit of weight I had left to hold. Watching him talk, I finally understood what I was actually looking at. This wasn't a monster. It was a scared man who'd made one desperate choice under threat, and then discovered that fear is a debt that keeps charging interest the longer you avoid paying it. Every year he stayed hidden was easier than the year before, because admitting the truth in year 2 meant admitting he'd let me bury him for a year for nothing. And admitting it in year 6 meant admitting 5 more years on top of that. He wasn't protecting us anymore by the time I found him. He was protecting himself from the size of what he'd already done. He admitted, quietly, staring at his own hands, that he'd lived only 18 miles from Bronzeville for 6 of those 9 years. Close enough that he'd driven past our old street once, he said, and had to pull over after, hands too unsteady on the wheel to keep driving. That the unmarked birthday gifts every year, the ones that showed up with no return address and a card signed from a friend of your dad's, those had been from him, mailed from 3 different states so no postmark would ever match twice. And that Darius, his own brother, the one who'd held me up under that green funeral tent while I couldn't hold myself, had never really stopped talking to him. Not once, in 9 years. I sat with that last part longer than the rest. Somewhere down the hall, I heard the elevator chime, ordinary and distant, the world still turning outside this room like nothing in it had just come apart. There was a knock at 1:40 in the morning, sharper than Malik's had been, official in a way you learn to recognize even half asleep. A man in a plain jacket introduced himself as Xavier Grant, part of a federal task force that had been investigating Andre Jefferson's organization for money laundering for the better part of 2 years. He showed a badge I barely registered, my eyes still adjusting to the hallway light, and said the insurance fraud angle had folded into that larger case the moment Terrence's tip landed on the right desk that afternoon. To be clear, Xavier said to me directly, his voice pitched low and steady, the practiced calm of someone who delivered this line before to people standing exactly where I was standing. You are not a subject of this investigation. You collected a payout in good faith on information you had no reason to doubt. You're a victim here, not a suspect. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding since the plane touched down 2 days earlier. Then Xavier opened a folder, and something in the set of his shoulders changed. There's one more name tied to the paperwork that set up his new identity. Someone close to your family. We're still confirming it. I looked at Malik. He didn't meet my eyes. He looked instead at the steel box still open on the desk between us, like the answer had been sitting inside it the whole time, and he'd simply never had the courage to hand it to me himself. Someone close to the family helped bury this lie for 9 years. Who could possibly have looked Imani in the eye at that funeral and said nothing? Xavier didn't make me wait long. The cosigner on the Nevada paperwork, he said quietly, watching my face the way you watch someone you're not sure can take what's coming, was Darius Washington, your husband's brother. For a second, the words didn't land anywhere. The room seemed to tilt very slightly, the way it does right before you understand you're about to be sick, and I heard my own pulse before I heard anything else, a thick, underwater thudding in my ears that swallowed whatever Xavier said next. Then they landed everywhere at once. I thought of Darius at the funeral, his arms around me under that green tent, sobbing harder than I was, saying, "You'll never be alone, Imani," into my hair while the rain came down around us. I thought of every Thanksgiving since, every time he'd shown up early to help me hang Christmas lights because Malik would have wanted somebody to. Every birthday card he signed Uncle D for a nephew whose father he'd been quietly helping disappear. I thought of him crouched in our old driveway, teaching a 6-year-old Elijah to ride a bike without training wheels, running alongside him with one hand hovering an inch from the seat, shouting, I got you, don't look down." And I wondered now, sitting in that hotel room with my whole understanding of 9 years coming apart in my hands, whether any part of that had been real, or whether it had all just been the easiest cover a guilty man could build for himself. I thought of his call the week before this trip, checking our flight number twice, so warm, so thoughtful. "Just want to make sure you land safe, sis." He hadn't been thoughtful. He'd been keeping tabs. The kind of quiet, ordinary drama family betrayal that hides in plain sight for years because nobody wants to believe someone that close could carry a secret that heavy and carry it so well. I didn't cry. I remember being surprised by that distantly, the way you're surprised your hands are steady right after a car accident before the shaking catches up to you. I called him the next afternoon, before we flew home, standing out on the balcony where I'd once heard Malik's voice floating up from the pool. Darius picked up on the second ring, easy as always. "Hey sis, y'all land okay?" I didn't tell him what I knew. Not yet. Terrence had been clear about that, and some cold, careful part of me agreed. I just asked him, flat, "You still talk to Malik?" and let the silence that followed answer a question I hadn't technically asked out loud. It went on 3 seconds too long. Then he laughed, too quick, and said, "What kind of question is that, Imani? The man's been gone 9 years." And something in the pitch of his voice, a half step too bright, the exact same note Keisha had used at the pool, told me everything Xavier's folder hadn't yet confirmed on paper. I said I had to go check on Elijah and hung up before he could ask why I'd called at all. 3 weeks later, we were home in Bronzeville. The apartment felt smaller than I remembered it, and louder, in the way a place does after you've been somewhere your whole life quietly rearranged itself. Andre Jefferson and 2 associates were arrested in Savannah within days. Federal agents had quietly investigated Andre's operation years earlier and lost the trail entirely. Malik's flash drive was the one piece that finally reopened it and closed it for good. Malik struck a formal cooperation agreement with prosecutors, full testimony against Andre's organization in exchange for leniency. The court gave him probation, 500 hours of community service, and partial repayment of the insurance money, paid back in installments. I told Terrence I didn't want to track too closely because watching it arrive would only make me relive collecting it in the first place. Keisha disappeared quietly to Cincinnati with her son, without a word to any of us. And I found myself hoping, in some tired, worn-down corner of my heart, that Theo never had to learn any of this the way my son had. In our living room one afternoon, my living room now, the lease still in my name only, the way I'd insisted, Malik knelt down on the carpet to look Elijah in the eye. The late light came in low through the blinds, striping the floor in gold, and the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, and somewhere outside a kid's basketball hitting pavement in a steady, unhurried rhythm. The same sound, I realized, that used to come through this same window when Darius taught him to ride that bike. My son looked back at his father for a long moment, longer than I think either of us expected, his jaw tight in a way that reminded me, painfully, of Malik's own stillness on the plane. Then he said the sentence that undid us both. I already learned how to live without you." Malik's face did something I'd never seen it do before, not once in 15 years of marriage. It simply broke. Quietly, without sound. The way a man's face breaks when he finally understands the actual size of what he traded away. He didn't reach for Elijah. He just stayed down on that carpet, at eye level, letting his son see it. I stood in the doorway with my arms crossed, giving them the room to have whatever this was, and for a moment none of us said anything at all. The refrigerator hummed. The basketball outside kept bouncing, steady as a heartbeat. Then Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small memory card, turning it over once in his fingers before holding it out. "I found this last year, in a box of Dad's old stuff in the storage unit. I didn't know how to give it to you." We plugged it into my laptop at the kitchen table, the same table where Malik had once signed loan papers with his hand shaking for a different reason. The screen's glow was the only light in the room by then, the sun having slipped fully behind the buildings outside. The video was dark, grainy, shot low like it had been recorded on a phone propped against something, but Malik's voice came through clear, recorded roughly 5 years after his disappearance, younger sounding, tired in a different way than the man kneeling in front of us now. "Andre's been under some kind of federal watch for 6 months now. I could probably go back safely. But Imani's built her own life, and I have Theo. Going back would destroy both families. Better if she keeps thinking I'm gone." That recording changed everything I thought I understood about him. He hadn't stayed away because he was still afraid. By year 5, the danger had already passed. He stayed away because coming home meant giving something up, and staying gone meant he got to keep both lives without ever choosing between them. What he called protection was really just permission he gave himself to avoid the hardest conversation of his life. And in that same moment, I felt something in me finally let go of 9 years of guilt for grieving too much. Because the man I mourned that hard never actually needed mourning. He was just choosing, quietly, not to come back. I stood there in my own kitchen, the laptop screen gone dark again, and I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. "You could have come back in year 5, I said, and you still chose not to." Elijah's small voice broke the silence that followed, quieter than I'd heard him in days. "Mom, do you still have your wedding ring?" What do you do with a ring from a marriage that was over long before you knew it? The answer comes next. In the weeks that followed, Elijah kept setting the table for 3 on the nights his father came for a scheduled visit. The arrangement Terrence had helped us draw up, supervised at first, then not. I'd stand in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in my hands and watch my son line up 3 forks, 3 glasses, careful as a ritual, like getting the number right might fix something the rest of us couldn't. 3 plates, 3 glasses, but only 2 people at that table who truly belonged to each other. And one who was still, in some way, learning how to earn his seat back. One of those evenings I remember more than the others. Malik showed up early, stood in the doorway with a paper bag of takeout he clearly didn't know if he was allowed to bring, and Elijah just looked at him for a second before saying, "You still like the orange chicken, right?" Not warm, not cold, just a fact laid on the table between them. The smallest possible olive branch a 12-year-old could offer. Malik's throat worked before he answered. "Yeah, still do." They ate mostly in silence that night, forks scraping, the television murmuring low in the next room. And I sat close enough to hear, but far enough to let it be theirs. Somewhere in the middle of the meal, Elijah asked him, flat, not looking up from his plate, "Did Uncle Darius know the whole time?" Malik set his fork down. "Yeah," he said, "the whole time." Elijah nodded once, like he'd already guessed it, and went back to eating. I didn't ask what happened between the brothers after that. I only know Darius stopped coming around, and Elijah stopped asking about him. And some doors, I've learned, don't need to be closed loudly to stay closed. I took off my wedding ring one evening, alone, after Elijah was asleep, and sat with it in my palm under the kitchen light for longer than I meant to, before I finally put it in a small wooden box beside the folded flag from the funeral 9 years ago. 2 objects from 2 funerals, I thought. One for a man who never died, and one for the marriage that actually had. Elijah found me there. "Are you mad at him?" he asked, quiet, standing in the doorway in his socks. "I'm angry he stole 9 years from you," I said. "And I'm angrier still that he could have come home in year 5 and chose not to." Around that same time, I did something I hadn't let myself do in 8 years. I called Northwestern Memorial, not looking for the old ED position, just asking what a per diem shift for a nurse with my background might look like now. The woman on the phone sounded almost surprised at how many questions I had ready. I hung up, feeling something loosen in my chest that had been tight since a torn envelope over a kitchen sink. I didn't take the job that week, but I kept the number, taped inside a drawer where I'd see it every morning, and some mornings, that was enough. At the final hearing, with Malik and Elijah both in the room and Terrence beside me, his hand resting once, briefly, on my shoulder before I stood, I said what I needed to say, steady, no tremble in my voice, the fluorescent lights overhead humming the same flat hum as every hospital hallway I'd ever worked. "You used to tell me I didn't understand money. I paid off that $18,000 loan with my own overnight shifts. You used to tell me I wasn't strong enough to live alone. I raised your son into a good young man without you. I don't need you to admit anything anymore. I only need myself. And I won't be taking a single dollar tied to the name Jamal Coleman." I set the safe deposit key on the table in front of his attorney and walked out without looking back, my heels sounding steady and even against the courthouse floor. And I didn't let myself exhale until I was through the doors and standing in ordinary daylight. That evening, I sat alone on the balcony of our home in Bronzeville, watching the sun go down over rooftops I'd known my whole adult life. The sky going that deep orange it only gets in late summer, the kind of quiet you only get to have once you've stopped waiting for bad news to arrive. Elijah ran out and wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin on my shoulder the way he used to do when he was small enough that I could still carry him to bed. "Mom," he whispered, "you're so much stronger than he ever was." I smiled, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. "I know, baby. 9 years ago, I buried a man. Today, I buried a lie. And this time, I didn't cry." Every drama family carries a story like this one somewhere in its history. The question is only whether anyone in it is brave enough to finally tell it out loud. This story reminds us that peace doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from finally knowing the truth, even when it arrives 9 years late. If you're sitting with a folded flag of your own, or a quiet suspicion you've never said out loud, here's something you can actually do this week. Call your bank or your attorney and simply ask what's still in your name. Old accounts, old policies, old paperwork nobody's looked at in years. Knowing is armor nobody can take from you twice. Call one friend today, not for a big conversation, just let's have coffee Thursday, because secrets grow best in the quiet of an empty house. If someone in your family has been protecting you with a lie, ask them plainly, over pie if that helps, and watch their eyes when they answer. And this Sunday, set the table only for the people who actually show up for you, on purpose, not out of habit. Imani didn't get through this by staying strong. She got through it by asking one more honest question than anyone expected her to ask. That's worth borrowing, starting with whatever question you've been putting off asking someone this month. If you were in my shoes, would you have given that man a second chance? Tell me where you're watching from tonight and what you would have done in my place.